mosquitoes, ticks are about 400 million years old, and mosquitoes maybe about 30 to 60, maybe older than that, but our most recent records are about around 30 to 60 million years old. And ticks, I've actually found them feeding on dinosaurs and things like that. So maybe in the next Jurassic Park movie, we'll be extracting dino DNA out of a tick instead of a mosquito. So why do ticks and mosquitoes suck so badly? The reason is because blood is really nutritious. It provides a lot of good things that these organisms, it's basically food for these organisms. For ticks, they're obligate feeders of blood. They're like vampires. They cannot survive without blood. Mosquitoes, on the other hand, for most of their life, and definitely the males, they don't feed on blood. They don't require blood. It's the females who require blood basically for egg production, to help with their eggs. And that's pretty much it. But we think that this blood feeding, it didn't always exist. We think it has evolved at least a couple of times. Maybe like for lice, for instance, they maybe evolved out of chewing mouth parts. And then we think mosquitoes and like kissing bugs, maybe these sucking mouth parts. So this is an insect right here feeding on plant tissue, and you can see that mouth part kind of going into that plant and feeding on plant juices. This, on the other hand, it is a very similar looking insect called a kissing bug, and that's feeding on people. And so we think that there might have been just a really easy adaptation from plant feeding into feeding on blood. So these germs, these pathogens or parasites, whatever you want to call it, these adapted to use that vector. So they might have existed as germs that we passed around from person to person, maybe through the air and things like that. And just incidentally, now the vector is a better way that they can, or just an alternate way that it can get passed. So something like tularemia, for instance, or rabbit fever, has multiple modes of transmission. It can get passed on from insects, or it can be airborne. There's a bunch of different ways it can be passed on. Some of these might have been just diseases that humans pass to each other, or they might have just been diseases that insects just happen to adapt to the insect. But there are many advantages to using what we call a vector. And you can think of this kind of like a disease Uber or a disease taxi, something that this organism will use to get from one body to the other. It's a fancy word vector, but that's essentially what it means. Because the outside world, there's a lot of challenges, right? Inside a body, it's one kind of environment. And then outside of that body, there's things like UV radiation. Things can dry out really quickly. And even when we think of these germs as just being these kind of anonymous, like ambiguous, floating, magical things that make us sick, they're actually living creatures. And they can be very sensitive to some of these things like UV radiation and heat and drying out. And also, some of these vectors, right, they're going to be able to transmit it from a similar body into another similar body. So if you are a mosquito that really likes to feed on birds, and you're a germ that wants to be in birds, well, now you have this perfect vehicle to go from one bird to the next and constantly going from one bird to the next. And so that can be really, really beneficial to take advantage of that particular vector. Most of these diseases that we're encountering, including Triple E, Lyme disease, West Nile virus, these are what we call zoonoses. These are actually animal diseases. They cycle naturally inside animal populations. We experience them when they get into basically the wrong body. So something like Eastern equine encephalitis, right? It has the word equine in it. Everyone knows that means horse, right? This is not a disease that horses kind of propagate and create. This is something that got into horses and really gave them that knockout punch, really hurt them. And that's why we call it Eastern equine encephalitis. Not because the horses are making it bad, but because the disease was really bad for a horse. But even things like Powassan virus, that's a relatively new one. We think that cycles in woodchucks. So what's interesting about this is since most of them are naturally cycling in animal populations, we actually believe the hunter-gatherer societies, like way back in the old days, and long before we really have recorded history, we think that there might have been really low infection rates of a lot of these diseases in these hunter-gatherer societies. They're dealing with these infections a lot less frequently than we were. And it wasn't until the onset of agrarian and agricultural communities that we saw a larger proportion of people become infected, about 40,000 years ago. And this is because we think this is attributed basically to community living, right? People living closely together. pushing out normal animal hosts. So if you had a large number of people that were widely distributed and also were living close, and now we're pushing out things like birds, pushing out the woodchucks, pushing out all these other things, well, these vectors, these mosquitoes and these ticks, they've stuck around and they adapted to blood feeding on humans after that point. And then also we have these other things like close contact with domesticated animals as well, we think might have helped with that jump. That was only about 14,000 years ago. And so these vectors, they adapted to a new lifestyle. They were trying out new foods, if you will. And so a lot of these vectors, like I said, a lot of these diseases, they cycle naturally between animals. And there's an interesting thing that some of these things, like some ticks and some mosquitoes, are what we call bridge vector. And it's fancy, but what it means is that these feed on more than just one thing. Like, it's like some people, they only really like to eat mac and cheese. Like, you know, you get the really picky eaters. They only want to eat mac and cheese. They only want to eat just a couple of things. And you get some people like me, I eat pretty much anything put in front of me. And so I might be something like a bridge vector. But that's what you get. So you get these natural cycles, and then these bridge vectors are what something might feed on a bird and then feed on a person, and that will make that jump from bird to person. What's really significant about this is that this particular year, one of the reasons why Tripoli was on such kind of a big deal is because there were a large proportion of these bridge vectors in the mosquito pools that were infected. In other previous years, you might have heard this being reported in the news, but they weren't necessarily bridge vectors, and there might have only been a handful of them. They might have been just these natural mosquitoes that don't really like to bite people and only really like to bite birds. Maybe those mosquitoes were detected with either Tripoli or West Nile. And so that wasn't as concerning. But this particular year, there are a lot of bridge vectors that were carrying Tripoli. So again, normally when a mosquito bites a human, and it can't complete its natural life cycle. So we call it a human's dead-end host, which means that if you're a human, you have Tripoli, and the mosquito bites you, and then it goes off and bites your friend, that your friend isn't going to get Tripoli from that. Or same thing with like Lyme disease. If you had Lyme disease, you had a tick bite you, and then you're worried that you lose the tick. You know, now is my kid going to get bit? Where humans are dead-end hosts for a lot of these things, horses are dead-end hosts for a lot of them as well. So are things getting worse, right? There's been a lot of, like I said, a lot of publicity on this. You know, the CDC released a report on the morbidity and mortality saying diseases had tripled since 2004. Is this all hype? Is this really happening? There's a lot of factors that come into play. I want to talk about something kind of unusual, right? So in 2016, something really weird happened, right? Does anyone remember what happened in 2016? It was actually the end of 2015. What about this? Does this ring a bell? Zika virus, right? So we had a lot of things about Zika, and this thing kind of tended to emerge. And then what about 1999? Does anyone remember what happened in 1999? West Nile virus. So West Nile virus that was discovered in New York, and we still don't actually know how it got here, because like I said, humans are dead-end hosts. So even if the human was carrying it on a plane, we think it basically came from Africa. And so if humans were coming on a plane and were dead-end hosts, it would have to be almost like a mosquito that was brought over that was infectious, or a bird that was carrying this that then spread it to other mosquitoes. It's a mystery. We're not sure how it got here. And then before that, does anyone remember what happened in 1982? We had Lyme disease get discovered, right? In Lyme, Connecticut. And so there's a lot of things that have been happening, right? And when you look at this, right, when you look at this map, this is basically a discovery of just tick-borne diseases since the 1900s. And when you look at the first area here, the last 40 years of this, there have been many more diseases discovered than the first stretch, right? So we think that there's more and more discoveries going on, but that still doesn't mean that things are necessarily getting worse. We do have better technology and things like that that can help us discover these. But it does kind of paint a picture that maybe more things might be emerging, right? We also see things like different patterns occurring, right? So with tick-borne disease, it's relatively steady, even though we see this increase, right? This comes from Mass Department of Public Health, and these bars are the increase of tick-borne disease. The green is Lyme. You don't really have to squint to see. It's just important that you know that the bars go up. And the tick-borne diseases seem to be steadily increasing. And then with mosquito-borne diseases, we see them really kind of come in cycles. Like I said, the last time we had big triple E was around 2010 to 2012, so it lasted about 3 years. And then before that was 2004 to 2006, again 3 years. And so now we have 2019. Like I said, I suspect it to continue for probably about another 2 years. But then again, in 2016, we had that spike of Zika. We had about 40,000 cases reported, including in the US and US territories. Most of those were US territories, but we still had that really large spike. And so with mosquito-borne diseases, that's kind of the pattern we see is very steady, very cyclical, spikes when you get a new disease. With ticks, it's just kind of a slow and steady increase that just seems to keep continuing. So what's exactly causing this? We want to know why now? Like what have humans done and created this picture? Is it becoming the next plague? So we have these emerging diseases and re-emerging diseases, right? So an emerging disease might be something like a new disease, something like how Zika wasn't really in people, and then it kind of mutated and changed, and now it's all of a sudden in people. So you might have new hosts from mutations, kind of maybe like the X-Men. You want to think of these diseases kind of like the X-Men. They just adapted to a new situation. Or you might have like a known disease, right? And then it might have been, historically, the conditions didn't really favor it, and now they do. If anyone's seen the movie The Thing, it's kind of like The Thing, where you might have a new condition bring out this new disease. Or it might be a known disease brought into a new location, maybe like an alien kind of brought into, like the Coneheads brought into a new location, and then you have that kind of be spread around in that area. So introductions of new species are definitely one avenue that you can start to see some of these diseases. So something like Zika, West Nile, definitely new diseases. New organisms, this is an Asian tiger mosquito, this is an invasive mosquito. So in contrast to a new disease, this is a new vector, a new organism that can spread the other diseases that we may have here. And then you may have a new organism and a new disease. So this longhorn tick we tested about 100 of them, maybe even more, and they've been disease-free of human diseases, but there actually was a report of this called Talaria orientalis. It was basically a strain of it called the Ikeda strain, and this was found in cattle, so this is like a cattle disease. And this disease is normally spread by this longhorn tick, and it's an Asian disease. So why is it here? And now all of a sudden we have this tick here that is the natural known vector of this disease. So maybe the two are associated. So you might have the two things go hand in hand as well. Another thing that can bring about change, in addition to introductions of new species, is maybe changing land use patterns. So this would be a parking lot. Doesn't look like anything that out of the ordinary, but when you zoom out, you can see how a lot of these parking lots and a lot of these changes kind of really shape the pattern of what this forest might look like. And when you look out this far, you can see all the differently colored areas that might have been forest that have then changed since basically what humans decided to build. And what this can do is this can change the predator-prey structure. So things like pushing out bobcats that would naturally prey on a lot of these small animals, or maybe the fact that we don't have enough large predators to prey on like deer might increase the population of ticks or mosquitoes that are out around spreading around these diseases. And then you also have increased tick-human contact or increased contact with a lot of these vectors. This 1988 study showed that 70% of Lyme cases come from backyards, and I've seen other statistics that were even higher than that. I just chose the lower one because I actually saw the study on this. Another thing that can increase, so like there's also this talk about climate change, right? So whether you believe in climate change or not, if climate change does exist, increased temperatures would most certainly play a role in increasing risk. Because with increased temperatures, especially with regards to mosquitoes, you would have increased reproduction cycles. A lot of these cycles are based on how warm it is. So the insects will reproduce and have more broods the warmer something gets. Also something called, this is another fancy term, it's called the extrinsic incubation period. What a lot of people don't realize is if a mosquito bites you, or a mosquito bites a bird, picks up, like let's say Tripoli or West Nile, it is not immediately infectious. It cannot immediately, and they cannot then bite a person and immediately spread that disease. It has to have this, basically a period of time where that disease will replicate inside that mosquito or change. And that takes a certain period of time. And so at about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, it takes about 15 days, for instance, for West Nile to become transmittable from that mosquito. But at 86 degrees, it's 5 days. So it's a drastic reduction in the amount of time before a mosquito is able to transmit that disease again. And so an increased temperature would most certainly play a role there. And then you might have warm weather species moving further north. So something like Asian tiger mosquito, we see moving further north. A longhorn tick, that's a subtropical tick. We might see that moving further north. And that tick is going to carry different diseases than what we're used to in this area. So right now, we're mostly familiar with things like Lyme, maybe babesiosis, maybe anaplasmosis. But this Lone Star tick is going to transmit 5 other different diseases that we don't really see that much. And so the warmer things get, the more likely that they make it into our area. And then if you have presence of bobcat and Lone Star tick, well, now that's going to be able to transmit a disease to cats that we don't really see around here called cytoxinosis. In Massachusetts currently, we have at least 12 different species of ticks. But we only really focus on 3 of them, right? Because there's only 3 really associated with human disease. So a lot of these other ticks, woodchuck tick, maybe winter tick, these are ticks they're the picky eaters. They're the ones that feed mostly on certain animals, and we almost never see them. But we do see these 3 ticks sometimes. And there's 10 different possible diseases. Mosquitoes, we have about 52 species of mosquitoes, but there's only about 15 species that we associate with disease. This one right here, this one can transmit disease. This one right here, this is called an elephant mosquito. And this, in addition to being what I would consider a pretty attractive mosquito, it's got this iridescent purple. This mosquito actually eats other mosquitoes as a baby and then as a pollinator as an adult. So what could you love more, right? In addition to the fact it is actually a movie star. It was in the movie Jurassic Park. Instead of this mosquito here in Hammond's cane is actually a male elephant mosquito. So not only is it not a blood feeder, the species is not a blood feeder, and then they just put it in this cane, and they're the ones extracting blood of it. So as an entomologist watching this movie, I had to have a big chuckle at that. And then there are 2 really big diseases that we focus on in Massachusetts mosquito-borne, and that's going to be West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis. Is there a tick in mosquito season? And I know a lot of people might be asking that question right now, as today was pretty darn cold, and I think maybe people are saying, yes, it's getting cold, like, kill all the mosquitoes, get rid of them, get rid of the ticks. So sort of, but not really. We have a few things that do stick around. This is the northern house mosquito. This is a mosquito that you might see in your garage or your basement right in January, flying around. It's not a very active biter of people. It doesn't really like people, but if you put it in a room with only people, this mosquito will bite people, and this has been shown to transmit something like West Nile virus, for instance. And then the deer ticks, they stick around, especially the adult deer ticks. They haven't even gotten started. They'll get started, probably this week or next week, and they'll be with us until Memorial Day. So they'll stick around in the entire winter. Anytime temperatures get above 32 degrees, you can have quick activity. For mosquitoes, it's really about like 50-ish degrees you want to get above for mosquito activity. And we see this reflected in the number of Lyme disease cases we see each year. It never really goes away. You get the spike in June and July, and that really reflects April, May, because what we know about Lyme disease is that the cases get reported several weeks after the bites actually happen, and so you're seeing these April, May bites are probably from January, February, and so that's really what you're seeing here. So where do we go from here, right? Things seem pretty dire, they seem pretty messed up. What can we actually do? So can we get rid of bugs? There's a lot of things that people ask questions about, right? So why can't we just get rid of them? I think we tried that with DDT, right? Can we keep the bugs from carrying germs? Can we keep these things, even if we keep the bugs around, can we then keep them from spreading around these diseases? Can we keep the bugs from just biting us? Maybe they're around, maybe they're carrying diseases, but can we just keep them off humans? Or can we just make ourselves immune so even if we get bit, we can be invincible, we can protect ourselves, and we So these are a lot of questions and a lot of ways that we will want to tackle this situation. So there's a few different strategies we can take. So something like, so there's pathogen, that's the germ, so that might be like West Nile virus, right? The vector, mosquito, the host might be a person, right? And so interrupting any one of these links, it can really kind of break that cycle and prevent, it can really reduce the amount of disease that humans are exposed to. So if you break this vector pathogen one, if you break the relationship between the mosquito and EEE, that would be like controlling animal host populations. So maybe controlling how it cycles in birds. Maybe for Lyme disease, they're having genetically engineered mice on Nantucket. That's what they're trying to focus on here. Maybe some of these aerial sprays are all, again, trying to interrupt that cycle as well, attacking the mosquito that bites the birds and therefore keeping the virus low in the bird populations. Interrupting the pathogen in humans, so between Lyme disease and humans, that may be like the Lyme vaccine, for instance. And then between a disease and the host, that would be more like repellents or releasing sterile insects to reduce the insect population, deer culling to keep the population of deer ticks down, those kinds of, maybe an aerial spray would kind of work on two fronts where it might reduce the number of mosquitoes that cycle naturally in birds, but also the bridge vectors that bite us too. That's the concept of that, maybe that aerial spray. Vaccines, it's kind of, people always ask this question. We have them for my dog, and we have them in horses. Why don't we have them in people? It's pretty complicated. And short, it has to do with the fact that there's a lot more barriers to pass when it comes to human vaccines. But they work. We used to have a vaccine for humans. It was called Lymerix. They're talking about putting another vaccine on the market, Valneva, that's a French company. They are in phase 2 clinical trials, but I'll tell you right now that doesn't mean too much. They could just stop now and we'd never see, that vaccine would never see the light of day. And then with West Nile virus and EEE, they actually do have vaccines, again, for humans, but they're not approved. Again, they're not through the clinical trials, so we can't use them. But they're a thought, but I mean, they're really only going to protect you against one of these conditions, right? And they're not all 100%. So they're not something that we can really rely on just yet for 100% protection. So what we really like to focus on is really just preventing bites. That's really the big one. This is why you see a lot of the newspapers report, they say, like, cover up, do this thing. They're really trying to drive home the fact that there's one aspect that we have complete control over, and that is the fact that we can prevent these things from biting us. And then maybe even reducing the populations of mosquitoes and ticks in our yards, that can certainly help a lot. So covering up, I kind of roll my eyes at this too, but I do have to go over it because it really does work. I mean, especially when it comes to mosquitoes, covering up, some mosquitoes can bite through clothing, but it will make a difference than if you're wearing just bare skin. With ticks, it makes a very large difference because ticks, they're not going to bite through the clothing. And so with the ticks, you can really delay bites that way. Tucking your pants in your socks can be really nerdy, I know, but it really does make a world of difference. I was told this story and it really scarred me, and so I'm going to share this with you too. I was told by a guy that the tick bit him in a spot that made him pee in 2 different streams. And so that's why I tuck my pants into my socks. I never want to experience what that guy went through. And I know that can definitely happen, so you don't want to run into that. So for sensing us, what's really interesting is that we can actually approach this beyond just covering up. We can attack the way that the mosquitoes and ticks detect that we're even around. So we might even appear almost like invisible to them. So with mosquitoes, for instance, they use a number of things. When they're really far away, they don't really rely on vision that much to sense where we are. They're going to rely on a lot of chemical signals. And with ticks, they rely exclusively on chemical signals. This tick right here, this is a blind tick. She has some photoreceptors in her back, along the sides, but she doesn't use vision to detect where we are. The mosquitoes and the ticks use Howler's organs, and that's what this is right here, and that's found on her legs. It's called a Howler's organ. Or they use olfactory receptors, and these are on the antenna of mosquitoes. And so they're going to rely very heavily on smelling where we are, not necessarily seeing where we are. They're going to look at things like CO2. So as I keep talking, I become a lot more attractive to the ticks and mosquitoes. That doesn't necessarily work for me on women when I'm on a first date, but talking a lot, talking more and more, I do become more attractive to these critters. Sweat, body odors, blood type they've implicated, and even body heat. Now mosquitoes don't use body heat until they're really about like a meter away, but ticks will very readily use body heat to detect where we are. And so we take advantage of that and kind of block that up with repellents. So these are your traditional things like DEET. And these are basically give ticks and mosquitoes stuffy noses so that they, basically a tick is blind, has no idea where you are. Mosquito's gonna have to basically be on top of you to know where you are. And so they can really impede the ability for a lot of these things to find out that we're actually food. EPA registered, why? Because EPA registered means it's safe and effective. It's proven. There are actually data on file that prove, if you pick up a bottle on the shelf and it says, repels ticks and mosquitoes. If you flip it over, it has an EPA registration number. That means they tested that, and they actually can prove that with the study. If it doesn't have the EPA registration number on it, there might be something missing. It might not be effective, it might not work, or worse, it might not even be safe to use. And so that's a really big thing. 25D exempt. So these are products, these are what you call your all-naturals. And these are, the EPA doesn't require that these are ever tested. So some of them might work, some of them might not. You really don't know when it comes down to it. I've seen some studies done that are put out by academia, and they show not as great repellency as your EPA registered repellent. So you might get about 80 to 90% from something like DEET. For an all-natural, you might get like 30 or 40. So they do repel a little bit, but I mean, that's a good all-natural. A bad all-natural might repel 0. And that product can be sold to you, and even though it's basically water and not repelling anything, it's perfectly legal and there's nothing that you can hold against them. That's just basically the stance that the EPA is taking on these. So DEET, there's a lot of questions about DEET. So DEET, not DDT. That's the really big thing that I want to drive home. A lot of people say, well, you sprayed that everywhere and that's why all the birds and bald eagles died. No, that is not DEET. They're two different things. So this has been used for about 60 years, 73 if you include the military. 200 million people use this annually. That's a World Health Organization estimate. And as of 2002, 8 billion human applications had occurred. So I want to talk a little bit about, a lot of times people worry about the safety of using this. Since that time, in these 200 million people per year using this, we've had about 4 deaths associated with DEET, right? But they were never confirmed to be only DEET. They've just been ambiguous encephalitis cases that happened when DEET was used. So we don't even know for sure if it was DEET. But you got to think, out of 8 billion since 2002, only 4. I mean, you have more deaths that have occurred from chewing gum than you have from DEET. So whether or not, and when I make the question whether or not this is safe, it's squeaky clean safe. You really don't get much safer than this. Compare that to mosquitoes that kill 1 million people per year, and I think that's a pretty easy argument to make in terms of using DEET. I mean, I like this other one too. Falling coconuts kill 150 people per year. So, I mean, coconuts are killing more people than DEET has ever killed. And so that's a really good argument to make. But you've got other options. You know, people like, I know my dad, right? He used to always, he really liked to kind of buck the trend. If you said you liked one thing, he always liked the other thing. I think he was like the original hipster, like hipsters before hipsters. But if you're that kind of person, there's also picaridin, or the official term is icaritin. So look, you can look for that on the bottle. This is not going to be what it's called. It's not going to be like picaridin in the way that it's called off, right? It's going to be on the label where it says active ingredient. You look for picaridin or icaritin. IR3535, that's an Avon Skin So Soft with Bug Guard. You've got these 2 other down here, oil of lemon eucalyptus or PMB, or this bio-UV. And those can also provide adequate repellency if you use those 2. My preference goes to either DEET or picaridin. I noticed that those, and also IR3535, those have had a lot more data to back them up than something these 2 on the bottom. So percentages really matter when it comes to using these repellents. You really don't need to go above 20% for something like DEET. 100% does not repel 5 times more than 20%. It lasts longer, but if you just reapply more frequently, maybe you can get away with a lower percentage. And that 20% is going to last you hours, so it's going to last you a very, very long time. Oil, aluminum, eucalyptus, you want at least 30%, and this value would be 7.75%. And I believe this only comes in that percentage, so you don't need to worry about that. The big one to worry about is the deep one, where that comes in a wide range of percentages, from anywhere I've seen like 7 all the way up to 100. So you shoot for the 20%, get that, call it a day. You have this thing, other kind of thing on the market, it's called permethrin. It's another spray. Again, you're looking for the active ingredient on this bottle. This provides really long-lasting protection. So for ticks, you know it's going to last 6 washings or 1 month. That's really that's kind of how long this stuff lasts. So it's not like a bug spray where you spray it on right before you go out. You're going to spray this a long time beforehand. Maybe let that dry and then put on your clothing afterward, and it's going to last you for that full month. It's very, very effective against mosquitoes. It's very, very effective against ticks. And this is because ticks, they're slow moving, they crawl up and over the clothing. Mosquitoes, not so great. It's not very effective against mosquitoes. It can work, but I know a lot of things have been shown. Like, you look on the bottle and it'll say, repels ticks and mosquitoes, mostly just ticks. So if you're using this and you sprayed your clothing with the permethrin to protect against ticks, you're still going to want to use something like a DEET or a permethrin, a DEET or a picaridin to protect yourself against the mosquitoes. I'm sorry, is that clear? Because I kind of mumbled a little bit on that topic. So you apply this to fabrics only, wait for it to dry, and then you basically just enjoy protection for an extended period of time. So this stuff, very, very good, but only really good against ticks. Is this stuff safe for infants, toddlers, and children? Safe for pregnant and nursing women? Again, you don't really get much safer than that. So very squeaky clean, safe profile. The big thing about permethrin is you got to keep it away from cats until it's dry. This is my cat. I love my cat even more than I love my fiance. And so anything that my cat is going to be exposed to, I'm going to make darn sure that that is safe. And I've spoken with a number of veterinarians on this topic, and they all say that once it's dry, it's safe. So you can, and these pants were sprayed with that permethrin. It's completely safe. Just make sure that it's completely dry, and make sure it's on the bottle, that you're not buying a tub of it at a really high concentration that's actually made to be applied to clothing. Because they do sell some garden centers that are made for like yard applications. Don't use that stuff. You can do source reduction, so that's about it for personal protection. But you can actually control the number of either mosquitoes or ticks that are in your yard. So reducing habitats is really the biggest way you do this. Mosquitoes actually require water. So while we think of them as some things that fly around, because that's when we see them, these are actually aquatic organisms. They spend most of their life associated with water. You've got eggs that are laid either on, this is an example of a Culex mosquito that lays its eggs in a raft shape, and it needs to lay them on water. Some mosquitoes will lay their eggs along the water edge, and they're called floodwater mosquitoes, that as it rains, the waters will rise, and then those eggs will hatch, and the mosquitoes will go into that way. But all mosquito larvae have to develop in some kind of water. It's just absolutely required. This is mosquito larvae, and this is mosquito pupa. Again, it has to be in water, and so very, very important that the mosquitoes are around water. Ticks need damp and shady areas. This is a group of larval deer ticks, and you can find them underneath this damp leaf. And there's a lot of them. There's a heck of a lot of them. And so the ticks require damp and shady areas. They actually require 82% humidity or above. If I were to bring a tick into this room right now and put it on that table, it'd be dead in a couple of days. It just cannot survive under the humidity that is in this room. So mosquitoes can actually breed in a plastic cap of water. And so that's kind of the way that you want to think of these. The soda cap, the plastic soda cap you see, a mosquito can actually breed in that small amount of water. So weekly, you kind of want to check these things weekly. You want to remove and replace water. Bird baths, like this dirty bird bath, you're going to find tons of mosquitoes. This is going to be loaded with mosquitoes. Again, the soft soil that's used for watering plants, mosquitoes. This prime breeding habitat for mosquitoes. Even these corrugated gutter systems, you can think of each one of these little ridges as a potential spot where mosquitoes can breed. and let's say you might have 5 or 6 of these gutter systems around your yard, and mosquitoes, a lot of mosquitoes, they fly like less than a mile from where they breed. And now you have a number of hundreds of breeding habitats all around your yard, wondering where the mosquitoes are coming from. You might want to blame your neighbor, but you can also blame yourself too if you have a lot of these things going on. Tree holes. So if you look here, you've got this hole right here. That's a lot of water, right? That's more than a soda bottle cap full. And when you get here, it's this tree hole mosquito that specializes in breeding inside these tree holes. And you can actually go around and you can kind of fill these in. You want to fill and not drill these holes, and you want to use a water-resistant expanding foam. You don't want to pour cement in there or sand or gravel. You want the foam because the foam will actually grow. It will. If you pour something hard like cement, it's going to harm the tree, and it's not going to grow with the tree. But the foam can actually get compressed, and as the tree grows, it's going to cause less damage and less issues to that tree. Sand and gravel are not necessarily effective. Again, ticks. Well, you're going to find ticks anywhere humid. So these are going to be really like not the center of your lawn, but going to be more the edges of your lawn. So not necessarily just tall grass, but shrubs, dense ground cover like Pachysandra, excellent places to find ticks, stacked wood, leaf piles, rock walls, again the edges of your property. This is where you're going to find ticks. And so you can either say like, oh, stay away from the edges of the forest, right? Or you can actually open up your yard and have more space available that is tick-free. Raking leaves now, not later, very, very important. There was a study just published this year that showed that there was greater winter survival in ticks if they had leaf cover to survive the winter. So if you're someone who's lazy, you wait till the spring to rake the leaves, don't do that. I know that there's this push now for leaving the leaves to protect things like salamanders and fireflies and things like that. There's definitely a cost trade-off when you want to think of these things, but if you're someone who's just like, I just want this area to be safe for my kids to play, you want to definitely rake the leaves now, not later. And while you're raking, of course, those leaves, what I didn't just say, they're where ticks like to be. So you're opening yourself up to exposure as you're trying to decrease exposure. So make sure you're being safe, wearing your repellents when you're out doing this yard work. You've got this thing like not mowing your lawn every 3 weeks. Now that's to help pollinators. That's to help improve the number of bees going to your yard. Another study published this year showed that if you don't mow your lawn every 3 weeks, it's okay. You're not going to have all of a sudden a tick infestation, and they're not going to go into your yard and be everywhere. Every 3 weeks, they didn't find any tick. They surveyed Massachusetts of lawns that hadn't mowed in 3 weeks, and they didn't find any ticks in any of those yards where they had let their lawn grow in for the 3 weeks. So that's actually okay to do. So again, you want to think about ticks, like if mosquitoes are aquatic organisms, you want to think about ticks as soil-dwelling organisms. Ticks are 80% are found about 10 feet from the forest edge. So what you can do is you can actually do a yard spray and prevent the ticks from coming into your yard. And this can be very, very effective, and it can have very long-lasting effects on the number of ticks that get into your yard. You want to use a pyrethroid, not an all-natural. And the reason behind this is that, again, pyrethroid, the all-naturals haven't really been shown to do much more than just straight water. And so you're kind of flushing your money down the toilet if you're going with an all-natural yard spray. I would either say don't do a yard spray at all, if that's kind of your choice, right? Or do a pyrethroid yard spray. Do one or the other. Don't go with the all-natural. Again, you're not really doing anyone any favors. But if you decide to do this yard spray, you want to do 2 times, once in early May, once in early June, and you want to repeat this yearly. And if you do that, they have shown to be 99, 100% reductions in some studies. Very, very good control over the number of ticks in your yard. Yard sprays for mosquitoes, right? So mosquitoes fly, but sometimes they need to land, right? They land on vegetation at some point. And you've got a number of different sprays here. The thing about mosquito sprays is that they're different than the tick sprays. They're not as good. They're all temporary, very temporary, and they're highly, highly variable depending on how they're sprayed and what's sprayed. There's a bunch of different things going on with these mosquito sprays. So again, with mosquito sprays, you're looking at days, a couple days, or several weeks. Never really more than that. With ticks, you can do the 2 yard sprays, and you're good for like a year if you do this for like as a yearly application. Mosquito sprays, it's not like that. If you do a spray now, I mean, you're not good. A couple weeks out, you may not be good anymore. Maybe even a couple days out, you may not be good. So again, it varies by the product. There's a bunch of different ways to apply it. Barrier treatments, this thing ultra low volume sprayers, electrostatic sprayers. And it even works at controlling different mosquitoes. So we've got 52 different species of mosquitoes, and some of these work against one species and not another. And so you get some really variable things, and I think they have to be really controlled. In this particular study, they did a review of all mosquito sprays from 1944 to 2018. And this is some of the data you see. I'll read this out for you. This one chemical here, deltamethrin, was sprayed, and it had 5 days of protection, right? This down here, this was bifenthrin. It controlled one mosquito for 6 weeks and didn't control Culex pipiens. This is the one that would spread West Nile virus. Didn't control that at all. And then down here, you've got the same chemical, and they sprayed it with a different kind of sprayer, a backpack mist blower, and you had control over all the mosquitoes for about 54 to 74%. So it works differently. If you look at this study, there's several pages of this. Tons and tons of variability depending on how the spray is conducted. What I would recommend is that if you're going to get your yard sprayed, that you should go to the Plymouth County Mosquito Control Project, because they've got an entomologist on hand. They're going to be doing this the right way. It's free. Above all, if you're cheap, it's free, and that's something that definitely would appeal to me. And they can do it for 8 times per season. So these are all very temporary. Again, they're temporary protection. So if you had something like an upcoming wedding, you might do it like the day before or something like that, and then you could have that wedding and you'd be good that day. But you don't want to spray in June for the 4th of July and think, oh, now I'm going to be good. No more mosquitoes. It's not going to work like that. I know a number of applicators will say, I do 4 sprays, I do like a spray quarterly or something, and that's to control ticks, mosquitoes, and they sell it like this magic bullet that's going to solve all your problems. I wouldn't buy into that. Some myths to go over, right? Tick tubes. These are not reliable forms of controlling ticks. They worked in one study done in 1987. They have not worked in any other studies since that point, and there have been 2 run that spanned multiple years. They were done over multiple states, multiple locations. They didn't find a single reduction in any one of those sites in those other studies. So why did it work the first time? I don't know, but what we know about science is it has to be reproducible. I mean, Nancy knows this, right? You have to have reproducible results. And so tick tubes, they just have not gotten reproducible results. I can't say they don't work. I can't say they do work. All I can say is that you cannot rely on them for personal protection. Citronella panels, again, kind of along the same lines. Some studies have shown that they have shown 0 repellency. Some of them show 14%, and sometimes they show about 42%. Either way, the EPA has decided that this is not an acceptable level of repellency to provide protection. So you can burn them if you think they smell nice, but definitely not something you want to rely on for protection. Mosquito bracelets. This one here, this off clip-on, it actually sprays out this thing called metafluorin. And that ending "thrin," that generally means it's a pyrethroid, so it's something like permethrin that you would spray on your clothes, and it actually blows that out around your body. And this one actually did show a fair degree of repellency. It makes sense because you're blowing a pyrethroid all over your body and around and things like that as you're walking. So that one could work. These other bracelets that work almost like a Livestrong band or a sonic emitter, these 0 effect whatsoever. So these do not work at all. I would not mess around with these. Cats and dogs. Proper protection. Again, you can vaccinate your dogs against Lyme. Make sure you listen to your veterinarian. So I spoke with some veterinarians on this, and they all tell me different things. Some of them say do this, some of them say do that, and they always end with, tell them to come see me. And I'm like, okay, geez, so that's what I'm going to tell you. Go see your veterinarian. So that's the best way to solve this. If they tell you to use one product, make sure you follow the directions, right? So this says small dog, and this says small cat. I know this might look like a small cat too, but it is not. I trust you. Trust me, it is not a small cat. And if you were to apply this to a cat, you may cause some serious harm, maybe even kill the cat. They work very differently in they're very different products. Tick checks. So mosquitoes, you can't really do mosquito checks. They kind of bite you and then they're gone, right? But tick checks you can do. In this study that was done in 1995, 90% of people did not find a tick in less than a day. So when we talk about tick-borne disease, they usually say 24-hour rule. It's not completely true, but people use it as a rule of thumb. And 9 out of 10 people did not pull off that tick within that 24-hour rule, right? Some people come and tell me, they say, I had Lyme disease, and I never even noticed a tick. Well, 9 out of 10 people here didn't even notice the tick, right? And then after 2.5 days, 13% of the people still did not find the tick. And at this point in time, after 2.5 days, that tick is probably about the size of a Tic Tac, and that's going to be on your body. If you didn't notice that, that's more than 1 out of 10 people couldn't find that on your body. If you find the tick, you don't want to overcomplicate things. I know life hacks are really big. This is someone showing you how to repair a sink using ramen. That's definitely not some advice I would want you to follow. Use a pair of tweezers. Grab that tick, pull straight up a steady force. That's all you have to do. It doesn't have to be hard. You just pull straight up a steady force. None of this dish soap and a cotton ball or anything like that. Just tweezers and just pull straight up. If you happen to leave what people call the head inside your skin, some people call that the head, it's actually the mouth of the tick. That's not going to continually transmit disease. Once you get the body of the tick off, disease transmission stops. And so that head is going to be a little bit like a splinter at that point, and that may be really hard to get out because there may be cement surrounding that, barbs that mouth part has. And so if you're spending time digging out that mouth part, especially if you have a young child or a squirming animal, that might be really challenging. I would recommend just leave that mouth part in, put some Blastotracin or Neosporin on that, and let that kind of work its way out. If you're experiencing symptoms, the symptoms are very general, nondescript, things like headache, nausea, fatigue. I feel like that every Monday morning. You guys probably feel like that now after this talk. You basically don't want to diagnose this yourself. Gather some evidence, see a trained medical professional. Don't try to WebMD this. I like this meme that says, has minor stomach pain, Googles the symptoms, it says you're already dead. And so that's kind of you look at symptoms and it's so varied. Your doctors are going to know what to do. Don't try to go it alone on this. But you can gather a lot of evidence when it comes to tick bites, for instance. If you're bitten, right? When were you bitten? So what we know about the diagnosis of tick-borne disease is it's usually done in association with an event, like a tick bite or something, right? And so if you know when you were bitten, like let's say you were bitten, you're feeling the headache, nausea, fever now, you were bitten like 2 or 3 weeks ago, well now that's information to give to your doctor. If you were bitten like 4th of July and now you're feeling that, maybe not necessarily a tick bite, right? What species? You can have this tick identified for free online. I can do it too. But this tick encounter, they've got people working kind of around the clock. They've got a lot of people doing this. They'll get back to you some information much quicker. But we know that the diseases that the ticks transmit are specific to species, right? The deer tick can transmit 5 diseases in the green. Dog tick can transmit 2, that's in this purplish area. And Lone Star tick can transmit these 5 right here. So if you have that tick identified, then you can know what you're exposed to. You're bit by a dog tick, no risk of Lyme. You're bit by a deer tick, no risk of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And so that's kind of it's a good amount of information to have. Otherwise, you're looking at all 10. You can get the tick tested, and so this is not for a medical diagnosis, but it can actually give you some good information. So this particular tick, this is a deer tick. It was on a woman that was 79 years old, and looking at this tick, I can tell you as an entomologist, this tick was on her for days. She said it was only attached for 12 hours. Now, this is one of those things where it falls in that, like if you went into your doctor, you said it was only attached for 12 hours, and they say, well, it's less than a 24-hour rule, okay, you're good to go. Now, I know that was not less than 24 hours, right? But this tick was carrying the agent that causes Lyme disease, and it was carrying the agent that causes babesiosis too. 2 different diseases. It's called co-infection. And these are typically treated with different medications, right? And a woman at her age, 79, babesiosis actually can be fatal. And so having this information, she can't say, I guarantee you have this. It doesn't, the fact that it's in this tick doesn't mean she has it. But if she now has this report, she can go in and say, look, I was maybe exposed to these 2 things. And then they can open up a conversation with their doctor regarding that. And I think that's actually valuable information, I believe. Photographing any rashes. So this is a bullseye rash that you might see after a tick bite. This is also a bullseye rash, right? They're the same thing, even though this doesn't look at all like a bullseye. So if you see anything like this, any rashes start to develop, take a photograph, show a doctor, get some hard evidence, right? Because if you walk into your doctor's office and you say, I have this red mark, you've told the doctor literally nothing. You've told them absolutely, it doesn't mean anything just to say, especially if you say, oh, it was huge. That means nothing. I tell people, I caught a fish, it was huge. What does that mean? What does that, if I say I caught an 18-inch brook trout, now we're talking. I've got some actual data. Now if I show you a picture, now you actually believe me. And so the picture can really do a lot. It's free. Everyone has cameras on their phones. And so it should be relatively easy to do this. And at worst case scenario, your doctor says, why did you show me that? I didn't want to see that. I don't think any doctors would say that, but that's worst case scenario. At least you've collected the information. So bottom line, with the right knowledge and awareness, vector-borne diseases are preventable. And at this point, I'll take any questions. I know we covered a lot, and I know I didn't go in depth on a lot of these topics. I wanted to cover everything briefly so that if people did have questions, we could dive into that. Yep.
Porch lights, do they attract mosquitoes? I mean, they attract moths?
Yes, they can. They can. It depends on, yeah, it depends on what they are. If they're like fluorescent or if they're the incandescent, they can attract mosquitoes different. And so I would look into that. I believe it's the, geez, I can't remember this now off the top. I just knew this a second ago. It's one of them attracts them better. I think it might be I don't want to be quoted on this, but I think it might be the fluorescent lights are not as attractive as maybe the incandescent lights. So you definitely want to look into what kind of things you're putting out, but it'll be different. Other questions? Yep.
You said leaves is a place that ticks are attracted to. What about mulch?
Depends on how damp it is. So it's going to be more the fact that it's damp. So the way that ticks actually acquire water is by secreting a little bit of saliva, and it's basically a crystalline structure, and it absorbs moisture from the surrounding area, and then they lap it back up. And so if the mulch is really damp, it can definitely be a spot where you could find ticks. If it's really dried out, maybe not so much.
The spray for your yard, is it the permethrin?
It can be, so a pyrethroid are usually the things that end in thrin. There's a few other ones that don't, but permethrin is one, bifenthrin is another one, deltamethrin is another one. There's lambda-cyhalothrin. They all kind of end in that. And so when you get a spray for your yard, I would just ask whoever's spraying it, say, what are you spraying? I want to know what the active is. A lot of people get yard sprays and they actually have no idea what's being sprayed in their yard. I was actually amazed at how little people knew about what people were putting in their yards. And I think that's really important to know that. And so you could just ask them, a lot of times you'll get an answer like, oh, it's going to kill, what are you spraying? Oh, it's this thing that kills ticks and mosquitoes. And then you're like, no, what is it you're spraying? And then they'll tell you what the active is. And so, or they might tell you what the shelf name is, and you can ask them what the active is. Or you can just say, is it a pyrethroid? I think that's the simplest way to do it.
You need to get 2 sprays, that's good for the whole year.
For ticks, yes. But you want to spray at the right time. The timing for the tick spray matters much more. It has to be like May and June. You really want like the first or second week of May and the first and second week of June. If you wait until July or August, you miss the boat. It's not going to work like that. Yeah. Yep. And if you spray too early, if you're spraying in March, April, it's too early. You're not. Basically, what you're doing is the nymph stage ticks emerge at the end of April. You're trying to hit them. You're trying to time the spray to coincide and get 8 weeks of protection. So the bifenthrin or the pyrethroid, they'll last for about 4 weeks, right? 2 to 4 weeks. So you're trying to get this extended period of time where you're attacking that nymph generation, and that'll reduce the numbers you see in the summer, the amount that make it to adulthood, the amount that reproduce the next spring, and then you hit them again the next spring, and you keep reducing that population every single year. And that's why you want these yearly applications leading up to like close to 100% protection. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So, the deer runs across your yard.
Yes.
And
Good question.
the ticks drop down.
So that's not actually what happens.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that the deer don't run across your yard. I'm sure that they do. But the ticks aren't popping off the deer like popcorn. When ticks are on an animal, they stay on that animal for a really long time, up to a week, right? And they typically fall off when the animal is at rest. So if you have deer sleeping and laying down in the middle of your yard and on like a bed of leaves or something, well, now these ticks may be popping off in that bed of leaves or something like that. But if they're running in your yard, feeding on your shrubs, feeding on your brush, they're not like popping off like that. Not with a lot of frequency. I mean, it could happen, but that's not how they behave. And so the running through is not going to spread them. I know a lot of companies have said they have like deer repellents now to keep the deer out of your yard. I think that that's more a good thing to protect maybe your shrubs from the deer or things like that. It's not necessarily going to keep the ticks out of your yard. Does that help?
Yes.
Yes. Do these animals die after, like, so if a ticker on a deer, then they bite us? Or is it just this, you know, does the same animal, if it bites a human, does it then bite somebody else? Or if it bites a deer and then it bites the human? Or do they die?
So with ticks, they'll feed 3 times their whole life. They live for about 2 years. And so they'll feed once after they hatch, they'll get a blood meal, they'll feed for about that week, it's a little bit less. They'll drop off, and it's like kind of like me on Thanksgiving, right? I just ate a big meal, now I'm just kind of like in this torpor, and I just kind of adjust my food. They do that, and then they'll get another meal, they'll become active about 8 months later, they'll get that feed for a week, drop off, go into that kind of resting stage, and then they'll become active about 6 months after that. They become, you know, as an adult, they'll again feed for the week, drop off, and then they'll blast out about 2,000 eggs in the spring. And so that's the way the ticks feed. And so they're acquiring these germs that cause disease after each feeding, but it's not until the next stage that they can now transmit that. So when they acquire it as a larva, as a baby, then it's the next stage, like 8 months later, then they can transmit that disease. Now for mosquitoes, like I said, the mosquitoes, they don't drink blood when they're babies. They're aquatic organisms. They're actually feeding on things like leaf debris and detritus and things like that, algae and things like that. They become adults, and then the females need blood to produce eggs. And so they're going to feed on a human, and then they're going to go off and lay eggs. They're going to rest, and then they're going to go and feed on a human again, or feed on something again, and go and lay eggs. And then they're going to feed on something again, and then go lay eggs. And they usually lay like a few clutches of eggs. And so this is where you're seeing a lot of these mosquitoes becoming contagious. Some infections are passed on from mother to child as well, or when the males and females mate, sometimes they become infected as well. And so that can be another one, but it's generally that you're looking at that kind of transmission. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. And is there a safe way to dispose of the tick? Like if you find it on your dog or your person, like I flush them down the toilet?
Yeah, so my dad used to think that the ticks could swim up the toilet. That's a myth, they can't. So he used to hit them with a hammer. And I still think that's the coolest way to kill a tick, right? It's so masculine. So, like, I saw it and I was just like, as a kid, I was like 6. And I was like, whoa. Like, I was just like, I was like, and so you can do that too. It's a little over the top. It's a little extra. What I do is I actually take the tick and I just put it under Scotch tape. You can just take 2 pieces of Scotch tape, put it between Scotch tape, put it in the trash. That way, I know a lot of people are trying to be conscientious about the amount of water they use and not continually flushing. Scotch tape is probably the easiest way to go. You can do that. Do not try to squish it between your fingernails kids do that. When I go and give programs in like elementary schools, kids always tell me, they're like, I took the tick and I squished. Don't do that, because then you're worried about like pathogens kind of spilling out. And like while transmission would be really rare and pretty uncommon, you don't want to risk it. It's not something you want to play around with. So that would be the best way, I think, the Scotch tape. Lint rollers, people have tried lint rolling. That's not 100%. They've noticed that, especially when there's a lot of ticks, it doesn't get them all. It gets a lot of them, but not all of them.
I burn them.
Yeah, people can burn them too. Some people, people have really creative ways of getting rid of ticks. There's endless possibilities. Let your imagination roam free. Other questions? All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
Not a question, but
Sure.
there's a really interesting article in the September issue of The Atlantic. It's about 28 pages long, but it's all about Lyme.
Oh, nice.
It's one of the most helpful ones I've ever read. And it is, I don't remember the woman's name, but it's definitely the September issue of The Atlantic.
Thanks for sharing. That's really good.
I'm sorry, what is it on? It's online. It's about an experience here that it covers a lot.
So they have shown, even like both ticks and mosquitoes do prefer certain blood types for some reason. I can't remember if it's O. I mean, did you read it was O? Yeah. Yeah, it seems they are attracted to certain things like that. I don't know. I mean, there's a, you know, my fiance, we'll walk through the woods. I do a lot of hiking, and we'll walk through the woods, and she is just loaded with mosquitoes. Like, she'll be walking through, and they'll just be swarming. I'll be walking through, I'll be like, there are no mosquitoes here. This is awesome. I'll look over it, they're just like, it's like, you know, like the kid from Charlie Brown that always had that's like her walking through the woods. And so, I don't know. I know that there's a number of different things though, like they are attracted to certain colors, yeah. So you have darker colors, blue and black and things like that. They're also attracted to like heavy breathers as well. So if you think like the CO2, like I said, they're going to be attracted to that. Or if you're really run warm, you know, some people they're always hot, they always run warm. I'm always cold. And so that might be one of the reasons why they're not as attracted to me. And, you know, my girlfriend, she's always hot. She'll be like sweating on a night like this. And so that might be another reason why. Yeah. So one thing I would recommend, if you like to do a lot of things outside, this was actually kind of a lifesaver for me. And if you basically have no pride in how you appear, a net to put over your feet. Like that would, when I went camping, I do a lot of camping and hiking, having a net that goes over your face. Yeah, they sell them actually, they're like $1. They're really cheap. It really, really keeps the mosquitoes away from your face, which is the worst place to have mosquitoes. Just the irritation of mosquitoes around your eyes, buzzing in your ear and stuff. It's awful.
Bead stuff all over me, and if I miss one spot,
that's what they are.
Spray all over me. They find the one spot.
Sometimes it's like your lower back or something. Like you spray your clothing and you bend over and like a tiny spot on your lower back, you can bite it right there. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, if people are just maybe afraid to ask questions, I do have my contact information right here. You can always email me at bdinius@PlymouthCountyMA.gov. No, sorry, it's PlymouthCountyMA.gov. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it covered what you were looking for. Thank you. Thank you.